Hello and welcome to Redefining Labor. So this is a seminar focused on exploring the tensions and the triumphs at the heart of the contemporary labor movement. Today we are graced with the presence of reporter Emily Guendelsberger, who has previously worked at the Philadelphia City Paper, the Onion's AV Club, Philadelphia Weekly, and the Philadelphia Daily News. In addition to all those publications, she's contributed in the past to the Washington Post, Politico Magazine, and Vice. But we're here today to talk about her recent book, On the Clock, What Low-Wage Work Did to Me and How It Drives America Insane, which is a fantastic book.
Thanks.
It's a work of sort of deep immersive journalism in the kind of work that is increasingly occupying a larger share of the American workforce. I think recently Oxford University found 47% of Americans are now participating in sort of low-wage hourly jobs. And so during Emily's experience in the weeds at an Amazon fulfillment center, a Walmart, and McDonald's, the price of greed-fueled productivity maximization is laid bare for her readers to see. And what we see, I think, is striking. On the Clock shows us how workers went from being the most expensive element of the production to one of the cheapest, and how those low-wage jobs have been remade to serve the ideals of efficiency at the cost of our actual humanity. So I want to thank you for being here, and this is actually our inaugural seminar meeting. And before you take over, I just wanted to tell everybody I sort of came to your work through an episode of Dan Denver's The Dig podcast. And as soon as I heard you in conversation with him, I just immediately knew that we had to get you involved in this seminar somehow. And I was just sort of immediately impressed by your storytelling and interview. And then when I read the book, I was sort of doubly impressed. And I think what you've done in the book is just really, you've sort of captured that the visceral experience of this kind of work. It's sort of its physicality, but also its monotony. I think with your sense of humor, also the absurdity, but there's also a sense of real kind of community that comes through.
Oh yeah.
And I think you've also done a great job of sort of contextualizing your experience within sort of a larger narrative of American labor history. And so I see your work kind of standing, in this tradition of like great works of immersive journalism, like I've taught nickel and dimed a couple times, and I've often thought to myself, like, this book's great, but I just wish it were a little more current. And it seems like you've really kind of filled that gap. And of course, like, it reminds me of, Studs Terkel's Working, and John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie, and Upton Sinclair. I mean, it's just like a welcome addition to, it's been a welcome addition to my syllabus for sure. And I think just our understanding of work. So again, I just want to thank you for being here and sharing your work and sharing your time. And just sort of as a way of getting started, I've been thinking about this seminar. And since you're kicking things off, last week when we got together, I promised the students that one of the goals of this course would be to just sort of expose them to the variety of ways in which people do labor studies. And so I was thinking maybe, like, in pursuit of that question, could you take us through this journey toward this completed project?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for all the kind words, and thanks for having me. I have not had an excuse to look cute in like a month, so did all my makeup and everything. I have always I guess how this all got started was when I was working for Philly City Paper, and me and Dan actually used to work there together. We were the two staff writers, so we go way back.
Oh, wow.
And at Philly City Paper, I talked my editor into letting me do a piece where I drove for Uber, and this was back in 2015 when they were, Uber is so omnipresent now, but like that was when they were just coming into big cities and sort of ignoring basically all regulation and everything, with the defense that we're bringing really good jobs to these cities, and the number that they were generally throwing around was 90 grand. Like, our average driver makes 90 grand a year. And like taking Ubers that did not seem accurate. Like it looked like the exact same group of people that would have been driving taxis in Philly. I'm from Philly, and they all. I'm a inveterate like cab driver chatter upper. So I would just like, hey, how's this Uber thing working out for like, did you used to drive a cab? Everybody who used to drive a cab said like, this sucks. I'm making so much less money than I used to, la da 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 da. And so it just drives me crazy when the media sort of lazily accepts just the numbers that a company gives them, especially about something good that they're doing. So in particular, like our average driver makes 90 grand. I saw people just, passing that off as like, oh yeah, that's true information, without, checking it at all. And I know why they didn't check it, because it's a total pain to do it, which I found out because when I was chatting up these drivers, I would ask like, so how much do you think you're making after like how much do they keep? What's the percentage? Like, what are your numbers like? What's your expenses? And like nobody really was keeping track of that stuff, at least not closely enough that I could actually, use it for like an investigative journalism story or whatever. It would have just been very holy. So I just was like, all right, I guess I'll go do it myself. And I got my editor to let me do it. And I drove full time for a week and then sort of on and off, like I think most Uber drivers do, for about a month after that. And I found that I made like $9 an hour. So that was not 90 grand a year. You would have to do it for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it was like 375 days a year or something like that. You would have to drive every single hour of that and take no time off to make 90 grand a year. So like that was actually kind of rewarding for me, because when I published it, like it actually did go viral and they stopped using the 90 grand number. And I think people started, at least I hope that I had a small part in the sort of greater media's general, like now distrust of a lot of those dumb claims that seem obviously incorrect. So yeah, that's how and I was just like a Philly newspaper reporter. I didn't really, like, I always thought writing a book would be kind of cool, but I never really thought that I could do that, because that seems like a thing that New York people who are rich do. But somebody from a major publisher like called me up and asked me if I'd ever considered writing a book. And that was the beginning of an extremely, extremely long journey, because I didn't actually get paid for this. I didn't actually sell my book so there's 3 chapters of this book. There's the first one is Amazon, where I went to work like basically less than a month after my newspaper closed, which was a couple months after that Uber story had been published. So, So yeah, that, and then the second one is in a call center in rural North Carolina, and between that and the third chapter, which is where I worked in a McDonald's in San Francisco, I sold the book. So for that second chapter, I was pretty broke, and I was like living in my car in a Walmart parking lot, and like it was just like, and working in this call center all day. It was kind of rough. So yeah, that's sort of how it got actually done. The reason I'd always wanted to go see what Amazon warehouses were like, and not just like those zoo tours that they give people. Like people ask me about that a lot. And weirdly enough, Amazon advertises like extremely hard to me about going in for warehouse tours. It must be something about my, I don't know, profile or something. They really want me to go tour. But I wanted to see what it felt like, because what a job looks like when you watch someone else doing it and what a job like feels like when you do it yourself are two incredibly different things. And like as a society lately, I think, particularly in the last like 50 years or so, we've sort of gotten this like fetish for numbers and metrics and stuff like that, and judging things by, and like this idea that you can quantify everything. But you just can't. Like, the human brain is extremely complicated, and we aren't anywhere near being able to like approximate that with even like our best computers are light years away from being able to like accurately reflect what goes on inside the human brain, right? So all of these metrics that are being used to judge the quality of jobs, like how much do they make? What are the benefits like? Like, do they like paid time off? Whatever. All of those things are hints at how a job is going to be, but they don't, it's just not possible for metrics to capture like, oh, this job made me cry, or like someone threw food at me at this job, or it was normal to have food thrown at me at this job, or the boss timed every second that you spend in the bathroom. Like, most of the things that I think people would say it's been my sort of hobby lately just to ask people what their best and worst jobs are. People always want to tell you about that, and it's always interesting. But most of the people's worst jobs were the worst jobs because of not bad pay or not bad benefits. Like, that barely came up at all. It was always like, oh God, I was like a cactus farmer and I had to clean wasps out of cactuses or something like that. Or I was a assistant to an Olympic horse trainer or an Olympic equestrian, and he made me do the 12 hours from San Francisco to somewhere in Canada in the back of the trailer with the horses while he and the rest of everyone else flew. Like, it's always just these things that wouldn't show up in like quantitative analysis of how good or bad a job is, but definitely are what actually make that a good or a bad job. So I wanted to try to sort of get around that, because human beings, I've learned as a journalist, human beings aren't real great at understanding how numbers work. Like, I think that's pretty easy to see in, like, if I say a million, a billion, a trillion, like, are those really, do they feel much, does a billion really feel that much larger than a million, and a trillion feel that much larger than a billion? Like, they just don't. Our brains aren't built to deal with really, really huge numbers of that scale and really, really small, tiny numbers of that scale, which is, again, why Uber drivers frequently don't realize that they are, if not losing money, making way less money than it feels like they're making, because Uber's driver side app is set up to make you feel like you're making more money than you actually are. It's really rather clever. So yeah, that's what I wanted to just get by that. One of the things that I am pretty good at is, like, I've always been a very mathy person, and I've found that I am very good at converting numbers into, it's like being a translator. I'm good at converting numbers into things that people can understand. And I'm good at making, again, I was trained as a musician primarily. So I'm also very good at making people feel specific feelings that you want them to feel. And that, in a weird way, like, despite having graduated college with a degree in music theory and writing and drawing graphic novels, it actually did equip me pretty well to do this job, because I am just decent at talking to people too. So yeah, when I went to work at Amazon, my newspaper had just closed. I was really, really heartbroken because I really loved that place. And it was right before, I think, Halloween. It closed right before Halloween, and I ended up finding myself, I just felt like I had to get out of town because it was just such a bummer and I was just like, all right, whatever. I'm going to go do this crazy project that I've always wanted to do. I haven't sold the book, but, like, I don't know, at least I'll make some money if I go, at least I'll be, like, working. Like, I'm not working at home. So I'll go do this. My poor husband put up with it admirably throughout this whole thing. So I just went off to around Louisville, Kentucky, and I signed up to work in an Amazon warehouse. And it really is as easy as that, pretty much. If you don't have any like real big felonies on your record, you probably can get hired at Amazon, especially right now. I'm very interested in how, like, because Amazon seems like it's going to be like this huge sponge that like sucks up all of the unemployed workers that happen because of this pandemic. So I am very curious to see how many like random people who have never worked in a warehouse before end up going, because they're hiring as many people right now as they usually hire for like the entire holiday season. It's like 100,000 people. It's a ton of people who are going to get a taste of what Amazon is like after, food service and stuff like that. Anyway, went to Kentucky. I got my first look inside an Amazon fulfillment center. And it is so cool looking. It really is. I wish I could have put photos in the book. But it's just this massive, massive, like factory looking thing. And my job was as a picker, which is the person that actually goes and uses like their feet and their hands to go actually among this like crazy warren of cardboard shelving where all of this stuff gets kept. And like your scanner will tell you where you need to go. Like you get this like long string of coordinates that translate to a specific drawer and a specific aisle and a specific wing. And then you find the thing in there. And the most difficult part about it for me was that the scanner, you used it to do every single thing you did, like every task that you had at Amazon. And I think this is true of every job. They all use the same scanner, and every part of the task is punctuated by scanning something. You like pull the little trigger and it goes beep. And so the thing about it is, like, whenever you get a new task, whenever you go out into the mod, and the mod being the shelving system, whenever you go out there, you have the task pops up on this scanner thing that you're holding at all times. And then there's this little bar at the bottom, and it counts down how many seconds you have left to do it. And it does that in a chain, like, all day. You were always on the clock. And I see that there is a question in the chat about organization with longer term workers. That really, honestly, it just did not really come up. I feel like the idea of organized labor has really become something that's kind of like, people have really bought into sort of the message, like the corporate message about unions getting into, like, they get between you and the company. You're like a family. Like, you don't want to have this union, like, what, you're going to pay them to, like, they really are kind of brainwashed. So, like, if you are trying to interest people in unions, you should probably start with the idea that they are probably not that initially interested in, like, union. But once you actually get talking to people about what they want out of their jobs, what they want to be different, and like the idea of power in numbers, that actually does really seem to sort of hit home. But it does honestly really, especially in Amazon warehouses, organizing would be so difficult because the turnover, at least at the one that I was working at, was just crazy. And about, at least where the one where I was during peak, so many of the people that I was working with were temps who would not be able to organize because they're technically employed by some staffing company or whatever, not Amazon. And people are constantly moving in and moving out. I think there was probably at least 100% turnover just in the month that I was there. It was really crazy. They just kind of suck everybody up, and then they have these metrics, and if you can't make them, then they turn your card off and you can't get in the next morning. So yes, I walked 15 miles a day when I was at Amazon, walking around. It was one of the most painful things that I have ever done in my life. And I have, like, I've done some painful stuff. I have like had a lot of broken bones and, bad things and surgeries. And this was really bad. The first 3 days were really bad. And it wasn't just like, it was just like I was somehow like weak and soft. Like I'm in pretty good shape, and like I wasn't working a manual labor job before that, but I have done them before for sure. And I also like the people that you see in an Amazon warehouse are like the people you would see if you just walked into like a DMV or something. Just like everybody sitting in the room, like that's probably the demographic that's working in the Amazon warehouse. It's just old people, young people, people of all races, like people. There were like 3 pregnant women who were out picking with me in my mod. It was really crazy. I cannot imagine how they did that. And yeah, so I did that for a month, and I don't know. I tried to interview everybody I could and talk to people that weren't just. I mean, the reason that I wanted to go there is you can't always tell what a situation is actually like on the ground unless you're there yourself. You can, like, I have a long history of like, you go trawl in places where like Amazon workers get together on the internet to bitch about their jobs. You can go find people through that, but that's going to be a self-selecting group, right? Because they're actively complaining about it on the internet, and they are not covering their tracks, enough for you to track them down. So that is. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought because I keep looking at the chat. About Amazon targets low income or minority populations. I don't think not any more than like McDonald's. Like it's this like most low. Like Amazon does pay better, even when I was working there in 2015, before the $15 an hour, like their minimum wage got raised to 15. Even before that it was regarded as a good paying job in, like Southern Indiana, Northern Kentucky, for someone who didn't have an education. It was, I think it was $10 or $11. And that was a lot better than you could get at a gas station or like a pizza place or whatever. So a lot of people, were willing to make that trade, make the trade of all of their energy for that day in exchange for, being able to feed their families. Like it is very difficult for me to really. It's difficult for a lot of people to explain what is so hard about working at Amazon, because when you say any individual thing, it like a lot of the American self-identity, like American identity, is very much based around this individualistic idea of life. Like you succeed and fail on your own, and you work hard and you don't complain, and anybody who does complain is just, unworthy of success pretty much. And you'll see that like in a lot, like if you go on Amazon things, even now, even in the middle of all of this, you go on Amazon forums and somebody will post something about unions or about Chris Smalls, the guy that just got fired from the facility in Staten Island. And people will just be like, what? That guy just didn't want to work. That guy was dumb. Like, why didn't he just keep his mouth shut? It's very like the competition is very like horizontal rather than the idea of like, like everybody on the ground sort of like uniting to sort of take on the people at the top. They really have people like on the ground sort of butting heads with each other. And I think that has something to do with the levels of stress that are sort of built into a lot of these jobs. And also like everybody who's listening to this, totally feel free to type questions into the chat. It's so I don't just like yammer on. I do want to talk about stuff that you're interested in, and I'm not sure like I guess like some of you have read the book, some of you have not read the book, but yeah, any specific questions you have, I will answer them. So yeah, I was working at Amazon. Say what?
I was just going to raise a point. I remember in your description of working on the floor, just to speak to that idea of like the obstacles toward organizing in a fulfillment center like that, just how sort of isolating the work itself actually is. I mean, there's sort of I forget what you call it, sort of the morning meetup, and then you all are just scattered throughout this building that is, I think you described it as it's larger than the Library of Congress. And you're sort of, there are certain areas that aren't even illuminated until you walk into them just to save a couple, pennies on the dollar. So, I mean, that has to be something too, right? And I mean, not only, an impediment to organizing, but just the kind of toll that type of work takes just mentally. I mean, it's physically exhausting, sure, but it's got to be sort of maddening.
It was, honestly, like I write in the book that I never, the pain was pretty bad, but I was never going to walk out because, like my body hurt. But like I really almost walked out a couple times because it was just so isolating. Like my day would go like this. Yeah, we'd have like a stand-up, they call it a stand-up meeting, and you have it before you start your shift and then right after lunch. And you would, get together, all the pickers would sort of like cluster together, and then we'd all pick up our things and sort of go out into this enormous shelving thing. And then you honestly wouldn't really see people that much, depending on where you were in the mod. But like I could go hours and hours without coming close to someone and like close enough to somebody else to say hello. And it got really rough for a while on me. And it wasn't just me, because like I'm kind of naturally pretty introverted, but like the people, like the clowns in my training class, like you could see it just wear on them, and then like they would stop showing up, just like, and that was a pretty common thing, just like, oh, that person that I had a conversation with, I haven't seen them in a while, I guess they washed out. I don't know. After watching,
and there's also that. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to add, in addition to being isolated, you have this sort of like this panopticon level of surveillance by virtue of your scanner that's constantly watching you, tracking your progress, telling you to hurry up. So it's like, not only, I mean, you're simultaneously alone, but just heavily monitored, throughout the entire day.
Yeah, it's kind of the worst of both worlds. You both like have nobody to talk to and no distractions from your work. And the thing that's so interesting and weird about America is like I felt bad saying that right now. Like the idea that like I would need to stop working, or like that I would be on the clock and not be working. The idea that I would be on the clock and having a conversation with my coworkers, or just like the idea that I was slacking off, that makes me feel bad about myself. You know what I mean? Even now, even after all of this research I've done on like, oh, this is not how we're supposed to live. This is not how we evolved to be in the world. Like we aren't supposed to go 11 hours without talking to anybody else. We aren't supposed to walk 15 miles a day. We aren't supposed to do just mind-numbingly boring tasks over and over and over all day long for your whole life. It's just not what we're built to do. We're like this very clever, imaginative, creative species. And that's why we like, I'm not going to say like won at evolution, but it is why we managed to become sort of the dominant species of this planet. Except that now we're trying to like, oh, like people shouldn't have to, they don't have to think while they're on the job. People are happy to just do the same thing over and over. Like that's one of those things that I found really fascinating when I got back into the sort of the history of business management. I never thought I would use the words fascinating and history of business management in the same sentence, but like legit, it is very interesting. Yeah, like because it has so much it has so much effect on the way that we live our lives today. Like, you can sort of see the ghosts of all of these past, business gurus whose ideas got passed up into and then encoded into all of these systems that run, most major workplaces these days in a similar way to Amazon's. Amazon's is much better than most, I think, but other people would like to be on their level. They're not any more lenient than Amazon because they are nice. They're lenient because their software isn't good enough yet to quantify and track in the same ways that Amazon's can.
Can you speak to I feel like your description, your quick sort of historical overview of scientific management and just kind of the life of Charles Taylor, and then of course Schmidt, his sort of archetypal worker. Can you imagine if Taylor were alive now, seeing an Amazon fulfillment center? I mean, talk about fulfillment. This would have been like, his dream come true, this amount of surveillance and measuring. And I think that, we often think of Amazon fulfillment centers as sort of uniquely, atrocious. But in fact, they're really just sort of the logical conclusion. It's like you were saying earlier, like our fascination with numbers and science and measurement. They're really just sort of leveraging the technology we have to exploit workers in new and exciting ways, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, like there is a sort of, it's not a weird, sorry, I'm actually going to shut the chat because I keep looking at it and then losing my train of thought. So just like throw me those questions if you would, whenever you think that one would be good.
Sure.
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Oh, I was just asking about sort of your
the history of business management.
Yeah.
Yes. So that is one thing that I have always done with historical figures, in that it seems a lot of the time that whenever you look into the actual home life or just like personality, who these people are, of all of these like great men of history, like with capitalized letters, they're always just total freaks. And Frederick Taylor was definitely one of them. Like, when I say they're all total freaks, they just have really different ideas about what a fulfilling life is than I think most people. And those ideas about what a fulfilling life is, lead them to be able to I don't know, like Bezos worked his ass off when he was starting up Amazon. I'm sure he worked, 20-hour days and was like completely committed to the company. But now he sort of expects all of his workers to be exactly, to be as in it to win it as he was, except they don't have equity. Like, they don't have any reason to do it. But still, the motto for the workers of the company is work hard, have fun, make history. That they're equally making history with Jeff Bezos, but they're not really being rewarded for it in any way near the same way. So anyway, freaks, weird freaks that make history. So Frederick Taylor was sort of the first one that I looked into because he was from Philly, for one. So I got to go find his tombstone in the local cemetery and stuff. And Frederick Taylor was the father of scientific management. So that was the first sort of time that they started to try to quantify everything, like quantify how many, tenths of a second it should take to make this movement. If anybody's read the book Cheaper by the Dozen, the Gilbreths were also they were also motion study people. So it's sort of like that. He would go to a factory and he would have a stopwatch, which he was only able to have because stopwatches had basically just been gotten to the point where they were cheap enough for non-royals to own them. And so he would time every second and every tenth of a second of how a worker did his job. And then he would set the rates for everybody based on his timings of usually the best worker, like the strongest, biggest guy, and how fast he could do things. And like the idea of eugenics is really threaded through a lot of the early business management people's sort of philosophy of how things work. Like in particular, there was this very firm idea that there's boss types of people, and then there's worker types of people, and they're totally they're like almost different species. Like he referred to his like ideal worker, who he called Schmidt, and he used him in this like very famous example. But he was like this big, strong guy, and but Taylor said like, oh yeah, like he was like perfect for it because he had the mentality of an ox. He just like, they are also like, the perfect guy for this job is someone so stupid that he does not know what scientific, like how to best do his job himself. And so you have to, take away all that person's autonomy so that they do it in the right way. Because if you give people leeway, if you give this lower class of people, this like lesser species, any freedom, then they will screw around, they'll mess up, they'll break stuff, like they'll do the job in a slower way than they could. And yeah, I mean, he does not seem concerned at all for like, oh, you're making them do 3 times as much as they were doing before, and they are actively like almost striking because it is so brutal. Maybe you should change your standards. But that's the thing, he never did. A lot of these like history making guys, just sort of by their nature, are very set in their beliefs and unbending, and they do not seem to pay attention to any feedback from anyone ever. So yeah, like Taylor, so wherever Taylor went, he sort of like hit the road as a business management consultant. Again, these are not terms that I really thought I'd ever be interested in, but he sort of spread this idea that you can time everything and that there is the one best way to do everything, and that it can be found and you can quantify everything. And workers hated it. And they hated it not just because it was harder or because they had to work harder, but they hated that it was dehumanizing. They hated it was humiliating. Like this idea, and it was also boring. Like it was miserable. Like, so you were taking these jobs that used to have a lot of like skill involved, and you sort of like make equipment so that instead of having to carry around a drill and like be able to use a drill bit to drill all of these different holes or something, people would make a giant drill bit that would immediately just drill all those holes together when someone pushes a button. So you can replace that skilled worker who is expensive and generally can like sort of like has a lot more power in labor negotiations, and you can take that person and just replace him with any guy off the street, and it becomes faster as it gets faster and faster to replace people because the jobs are easier and easier. Then turnover gets less and less costly, and you have to put less and less effort into making these jobs, not miserable, someplace that you would want to stay for, more than a year or two. And yeah.
You mentioned that too, and the idea of these like cyborg jobs where humans are sort of reduced to these types of automatons performing these rote tasks over and over again. Yeah, I thought the Taylor material was just really fascinating to read alongside, a more contemporary example of this same type of scientific management. I'd always been told that some of the innovations in early cinematography actually came out of scientific management because they were actively like recording the employees doing these tasks. And I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a great documentary just called Clockwork.
No,
and
actually.
it's got some of the original footage from Taylor filming.
Oh, no way.
I think it's actually Schmidt. Yeah, it's really, you can it's YouTubeable. It's definitely worth checking out.
Oh, I'll have to
Um,
find that. Smith was hot. I would like to see him in motion.
Yeah, well, and I always show it to my intro to labor studies students. Not be, I mean, again, it's one of those things where no one would ever think this would be fascinating, but it's just, oh my God. And
It really is, because it makes so many things about modern jobs make so much more sense. Like,
yeah,
it makes you feel less crazy. You're like, oh, that's why this feels awful. Like, that's why I feel so, dehumanized. It's because they would prefer to have a robot there, but they just don't have good enough robots yet. But they
yeah.
can control workers to the point where they are essentially robots.
Well, that's I heard, and I don't want to get to these student questions too. But you just reminded me of something. The New York Times, The Daily, had a podcast episode on fulfillment centers recently.
Oh, yeah?
And I mean, it was terrible. I don't know if you listened to it, but it's that somebody actually dies on the floor, and they put a cone up next to this person. I mean, it's just like the worst stories I've ever heard.
Was it recent?
But,
Weirdly enough, there is one about a warehousing company called XPO that sometimes gets changed out for Amazon.
yeah,
Is it that one?
yeah, it's the XPO.
I did hear that one.
Yeah. But the sort of silver lining to the entire story was kind of like, well, don't worry. In 20 years, these jobs won't exist anyway. It's like it's going to be fully automated. So I guess
that'll be a completely different but still really big problem.
Yeah, exactly. Different problem. But I did want to touch on. We've got some great questions rolling in here. A couple about sort of the just organization within the fulfillment centers. I know you mentioned in the book the type of propaganda you were met with as you were sort of onboarded, and then connected to that, I was kind of curious. One of the students wanted to know whether or not you were still shopping at Amazon after this experience.
Not really. I get asked that a lot, and I always want to cover my bases because me and my husband have a shared Amazon account, and occasionally he uses it a lot more than I do, but it's still my name's on it, so I don't want to make any claims or anything.
Yeah.
But I just try not to ever rely on it. I try to buy locally whenever I can. I just bought something from Amazon because I can't get it locally. But I think boycotting Amazon or personally not buying anything from Amazon is operating from this very individualist idea about what you can do to better society, I guess. In that, people ask all the time, oh, is it bad if I buy your book off Amazon? I'm like, do what you want, man. One person buying or not buying stuff from Amazon makes absolutely no difference to them. There are enough people that they will be fine. Boycotts are not going to produce any sort of change. This has to be either unions or government, one of them two. And probably a combination of them both are the only things that are going to change conditions in fulfillment centers, I would say.
And so what type of sort of anti-union propaganda were you exposed to when you were working in
I personally, I wasn't there long enough to get actual anti-union propaganda. There's, the videos that they show to managers are out there on the internet for sure. But honestly, it just doesn't really come up that often. It's just you don't really have that much time to talk to people. There's definitely a vibe at Amazon. Everybody kind of, I think, understands that people who talk about unions don't stick around for long. Amazon is very much against unions. So I didn't want to give myself away, honestly. I already, was not from around there. And I'm pretty sure that a group of people that I ended up interviewing was going into it thinking that I was a union organizer. So I actually did not see any anti-union propaganda personally that I particularly remember, but it was very clear that that was not a thing that you wanted to discuss.
Yeah. Well, somebody else chimed in on the chat room about the proposed, what was it, Amazon 2, when they were talking about moving to Brooklyn, and how one of the preconditions of that opening up that facility was that they had to be open to unionization. And that was
Hmm.
one of AOC's big sort of, I feel like one of the moments where she really emerged. And they said absolutely not, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they have very clear opinions about whether unions would be in their interest or not. And yeah, I mean they're right about that. Like having a union would not be in the Amazon company's short-term self-interest, I would say. Uh, but screw them. It's in the workers' best interest for sure, especially now.
Well, and that's one of the students, I think, submitted ahead of time, asked about sort of the kind of the way these jobs are designed to not be long-term positions. And they are, they're just so physically and mentally taxing that there's really, sure, people do have them for several years, but, like you said, the turnover is sort of baked into the system, right?
Yeah, I mean, longest I talk to a lot of people, and usually you don't really even get people who are there for 6 years. Usually, the veterans are like 3, because the raises suck. At least they used to. My guess is they probably still do. And my guess from like just Amazon, like subreddit chatter is that the raises still are not the raises are at a level that are not designed to keep people around for multiple years. They don't want they don't want lifers. They want a turnover of new blood.
Are there clear paths to advancement out of the fulfillment center or even within the fulfillment center?
I mean, you can advance in the sense that you can get into like you can learn all sorts of new jobs, and like that'll change up your day a little bit, but you don't really get paid that much more for them. And at least in my experience and the people that I talk to, most of the people who are in actual upper management, like the people who actually have the good paying jobs, generally come from colleges.
Yeah.
It is not easy to, if you don't have an education, to get up into the above the lower management level.
Yeah, so you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but
Only so far.
Yeah. There was another question that came up in terms of I feel like this is an anecdote that certainly stuck with me. The idea of, in the name of efficiency, Amazon deciding to just leave sort of ambulances in the parking lot running, so when the employees passed out, they wouldn't have to call them. And I was curious just to know, like within this sort of logic of productivity and efficiency. Why does Amazon seem to have seems to be utterly impervious to like critique or rebuke? Why don't we think of
About that
Amazon?
though, I don't know about that. I think that the last few years there has been a turn against them. Like these days, like I feel like when I was a kid, the job that was generally regarded as the lowest common denominator was probably like McDonald's, which as I became, a young adult, I think that was probably Walmart. Now it's Amazon, though. I think Amazon warehouses are. I don't know. Like I definitely think Amazon gets more scrutiny actually than other companies in terms of, in particular, safety. The warehouse conditions everywhere are not good. And Amazon is at least concerned enough about their public face, because they know that now there's such a force that people are actually looking at them and looking at them with a very critical eye. Like in particular, like it was funny, like I was talking with this writer, or I was talking with someone who works at the Wall Street Journal about Amazon, and he was just like, yeah, it's kind of funny, like everybody loves it when I dunk on Amazon now, like conservatives and liberals, in that like the liberals because of the bad, or like I guess right and left is a better example of who it is, because the right or the left is just like, this is horrible, and then the right is like, you're cheating at capitalism, this isn't fair. So I really don't think they have that much support anymore, or goodwill, except among like the bougie, whose only connection with it is like how beautifully things arrive on their doorstep and how quickly they do. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the question.
Well, I think there's a certain degree to which, because Amazon is the size that it is. I mean, we're sort of all complicit in its success too, right? I mean, I still, like you. I mean, I have an Amazon account. It's it's sort of it's an octopus, right? It's sort of impossible to avoid in its entirety. You can sort of choose to abstain from certain portions of it, but I feel like sometimes to attack it too directly is also to risk sort of exposing yourself as a hypocrite.
Yeah.
We have a question on sort of the subdivision of Amazon. I don't know if this is something you would be able to answer, but the idea that how can governments or unions regulate and bargain with Amazon as their ultimate employer when you have companies sort of selling their products through Amazon? Because Amazon's now a large part of their portion of their business is sort of, after driving smaller businesses out of business, they've now become sort of the online hub for selling the products those businesses used to sell. Is that a potential inroad for organizing, do you think?
No, I mean that's why I really do think that the only thing that will unionize Amazon is either the laws about how you can unionize get changed a lot, or there's just a complete worker revolt, like across all of the different fulfillment centers, that's organized and timed during a time when they are desperately needed, such as now.
Yeah.
But
well, this one, I guess,
again, like I don't think that Amazon personally is that much worse than other companies, or like it's not like Amazon is the one company that you need to feel bad about using. Like the chicken you eat is processed by people with horrible jobs. The clothes that you wear are made by people with horrible jobs in other countries. Like, it's very difficult to participate in the modern economy without being indicted in some way. Yeah. So I try not to get hung up too much on that, and I try to suggest that other people not get too much hung up on that, as long as they are working to make things better, to improve things, and to sort of change our general thoughts about, or the general milieu about what unions are and what unions can do. I wouldn't feel, if you use Amazon, don't feel that bad about it, like, for real. I don't use Uber anymore, but I think I'm blacklisted on their end. But like, don't feel too bad about it. Everything is bad. It's a bad world right now.
Yeah.
We can make it a better world, but it's a bad world.
I think I may have misunderstood the question that I was actually that popped up on the chat board, but this person was actually talking specifically about the Amazon, or I guess independent LLC warehouse workers and drivers who actually aren't technically employed by Amazon, but work.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons that it is so hard to unionize, because like they have like a few big staffing agencies that they work with. The one that I got a job through, Integrity Staffing, they seem to be only like or at least like 95% of their business is staffing Amazon warehouses. It's almost like they're a little subdivision, but they're technically their own little company. So, I mean, businesses have gotten really good at throwing up these walls between people and unions. And at the moment, there does not seem to be any will to change that, political will to change that. And until there is political will to change that, Amazon is not going to get unionized.
I had another question. I keep wanting to ask about your run-in with the person dressed up as Santa, but I'll leave that to the end.
It was such a delightful day.
I felt like I didn't know if that was like it was a comparatively shorter chapter too. I don't know if it was like a dreamscape thing or what, but it almost sort of read like a panic delusion.
It was very surreal, and to be honest, I turned this book in like 40,000 words too long. So I had to cut a lot of stuff out. And that was one of the things I had to cut. I had a long conversation with that guy, and he was really interesting. Like, he used to work, like, he was a drug counselor for like 20 years, and his like company had just gone under, and he was like very into Jesus, and he had like this very interesting story that I unfortunately just had to clip because it really didn't have much to do with anything else. But yeah, I was walking around on Christmas Eve. For those who have not read the book, I was working Christmas Eve, and I was walking around the mod, and I just passed this aisle, and then I sort of like, what was that? I walked back, and there was this guy, this like perfect Santa. Like, he had like this natural beard. He looked perfect, except that he was wearing a full Santa suit, but with like the cut off sleeves. And it was just awesome. Like, it was just awesome to see. He said he did it to cheer everybody up because nobody likes to work on Christmas Eve. But he was a very nice man.
I feel like one of the things I realized sort of reviewing that section for in anticipation of this conversation was there was a line that stuck out to me as I guess maybe I just missed it the first time through, but sort of halfway through that chapter, you mentioned that you came to the fulfillment center to try to understand what it feels like to work in a fulfillment center. But the thing I really and truly understood now is that regardless of how broke I may be, I'm the upper class. I always will be. I won't ever really understand what it feels like to work here because I know that I get to leave. Mm-hmm. Which to me was just, I mean, it's sort of a haunting revelation. I just wanted to hear you kind of talk maybe a little more about just the kind of realizations about class in America you had as you were sort of you're kind of moonlighting as an Amazon employee, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that was something that I was, concerned about going in. And I have gotten like a couple Goodreads reviews that are like, I would rather see this book written by like someone who actually has to work this job. And like, yeah. I feel that for sure. But the thing is, like, people who work in Amazon warehouses don't get to write books. I don't know how we can make it any clearer than that. I barely got to make a book. You get to write books if you have the time, if you have a lot of time to be able to write and a lot of energy. Neither of those are widely available when you work for an Amazon warehouse. And also, you also have to have generally like New York connections. You have to have journalism connections. When you sell a book, part of your proposal is, who's going to buy this? What media connections do you have that will help us publicize this book? Like that sort of thing. That's why people with Twitter, like huge Twitter followings, can get a book real easy. But like just some random, and also I have like 15 years of writing experience too. Writing in a way that will get people to actually understand what it feels like is hard. And it's very hard to write in a way that will change people's minds. And one thing that also was very interesting to me about this sort of like revelation of like my upper classness, I think we all do tend to get we think of ourselves as where we are. Like if you see like a hierarchy or whatever in your friend group or in your social circle or whatever, you start thinking of yourself as in that position in life rather than just in your social circle or whatever. And so I went to a fancy college. I went to Oberlin, and when I was there, like I came from a pretty well-off suburb, but I was like, like pretty working class in a well-off suburb. But I still got to go to a high school that had 3 marimbas, which is, that's pretty high budget. So that meant that I had the opportunity to like be in a really good marching band and like go all state for mallet percussion and stuff like that. But it was just like where I wouldn't have had that opportunity at all. Right. And so when I went to Oberlin, I started noticing that all around me, me and my friend had a joke about like every third person we met was a secret millionaire. And that's kind of true in a lot of these sort of higher circles of with national political influence. Like media is hard to get into now unless you can afford to do a few years of basically full-time work for incredibly bad pay, like pay that won't even buy you the worst studio in rent. You know what I mean? Like it's just like these professions are getting exclusive for people who do not have a ton of money. And it's only gotten worse since I sort of like knocked my way in 15 years ago. And that means that for example, when I was at Oberlin, because I went to the schmancy thing, I started thinking of myself as like poor because I, had a 30-hour-a-week job while I was, and most of my friends did not. Like, and even nowadays, like I'm still great friends with like my friends from college, but a lot of the time they'll be talking about some thing that happened or some like that time we watched Beavis and Butthead or whatever, and they'll be talking about it as if I was there, and I'll be like, no, I wasn't there for that. And it happens with like almost all of my memories from college. I'm just like, I wasn't there for that one. I was working. So in any event, sorry, that is how I started. So I sort of started thinking of myself as, oh, I understand what it's like to be poor. I didn't. I totally didn't. And it was very embarrassing to me when I realized that. And the one that really hit home for me was that I wrote it in that scene. It was just humiliating to realize how out of touch I was. And I think that's true for everybody, though. It's a human thing to understand your position in sort of like life's hierarchy as just your station in, like the 200 closest people, right? So so that's why people who make 200 grand a year can feel poor or say that they're living paycheck to paycheck or whatever, because they're thinking of themselves in comparison with other people, whereas they would never ever consider like doing dental surgery on themselves in the way that like one of my housemates in the second chapter did. Like she had an abscess tooth and they didn't have insurance and they didn't have any money. So they just went at it with like a bent safety pin and a bottle of isopropyl alcohol. And like, that is what being poor in America means. Like it's different. And that realization that night in the car, I had walked 15 miles that day and my feet felt like they were going to fall off. And I was seriously considering just going to sleep in my car overnight in December because I was just so tired. And there's this constant refrain, I think, throughout the book. I sort of like come back to this whenever I have another embarrassing, humiliating realization about like how out of touch I am. It's punctuated by the words "you idiot," sort of like in italics, because that is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And what's crazy though is like, if I was out of touch, the people who are in charge of this country are so out of touch.
Yeah.
All right. So there's one of the things in the book, it opens with this discussion of the term "in the weeds," right? And how your understanding of it kind of can be used to like describe what class you're from usually. Like if your idea of what "in the weeds" means is like you're really like stuck in the details, like you're too close to a project, you gotta like back off and, you know, be able to see the forest for the trees, whatever. That's, I think, generally the academic version of it. And there's another definition of it, which is the food service one, which is the one I know, which is that you are screwed. You just have too many customers, you can't keep up, you're just running around like a chicken with your head cut off. And like the higher up on the income level people are, the more likely they are to know the academic version. And so in the intro to the book, I was like, I've always wanted to like ask everybody in Congress what in the weeds means to them. And crazily enough, I actually did get to do that. I got invited to do the Senate Democratic Caucus's book club a while, like, and I did it like right before all of this crazy coronavirus stuff went down. Like I actually like had to cut my talk by like 20 minutes because they had to spend 20 minutes doing like emergency coronavirus prep stuff. But I did get the opportunity to ask all of the Democratic senators if what in the weeds meant. Not a single one knew the food service one. Like, and it was remarkable. Like there was this murmur when one aide knew it. Like one aide raised her hand and was like, oh yeah, if you're in food service, it means that like, you know, you're screwed. And everybody's like, like it was clearly a surprise to them. And I think that's pretty telling. So we're all out of touch.
If only Paul Ryan were in the room, right?
Right. And well, that's the other thing is that another reason it has to be another thing is that like workers are also out of, like Amazon warehouse workers are also really out of touch with what the upper class considers reasonable, right? Like if you were to just pull some congressperson and just throw them in an Amazon warehouse and have them work for a month, they would be appalled because they would not have experienced that sort of level of dehumanization before. And it wouldn't just be the difficulty of the physical work. It's just the like the condescension, the like, oh, you time off task, like you can't have exactly 18 minutes a day of time. And then and this has to encompass going to the bathroom, getting water, like walking to and from the doors. Like that's all time off task when you're not actively working, like actively picking items for Amazon. Like people who have had good jobs are not used to that. They're not used to having it matter whether you come back after break, like whether your lunchtime is exactly 30 minutes or whether it's 31 minutes. Like that sort of thing is just not something that I think a lot of rich people are aware of. I don't know, like, what do you guys think?
This question that just came up in the chat board is pretty interesting. It's actually one that I had written down as it was a previously submitted one. This idea of sort of the American dream, and sort of, I guess now we're kind of talking about a differentiation of American dreams between people who might find themselves working in a fulfillment center versus people who might find themselves working in Congress. But just speaking specifically of the people you came into contact with, many of whom I keep thinking about that karaoke scene where you sort of approach one of your colleagues about this job, and it seems like you're expecting that she's going to say, yes, I hate it, and you get the complete opposite. She loves it, right? But it's, maybe because she just doesn't know that there are alternatives, and it is a well-paying job. But I'm just kind of piggybacking off this question of like, what did you learn about the American dream during this experience?
That it means really different things to different people. There's like a really big linguistic problem with the words that I think we use to talk about work, especially when it like comes to this sort of split in classes. Because like when somebody in Congress says like a good job, they're picturing one thing, and the person who's working in Amazon warehouse says good job, they're picturing a completely different thing, and probably one that the congressperson would not think is a good job. There were plenty of people in Amazon who think their job is a good job, like especially with the $15 an hour thing. That is so much more than you can make in rural areas. It's not even funny. And people are like yeah, like there's a lot of Amazon employees that really feel very grateful to Amazon for, for example, they have what's called PTO, uh, or they have UPT rather, and that's what you get to deal with all your sick time, like any childcare problems you have, like any time off you have comes from this sort of like one big pool. It's not really for vacations. You're supposed to save it for when it's needed, but you also don't really get that much vacation time. But yeah, like all of these people were like, oh yeah, the unpaid time off is great. Like it makes my life more flexible. Like I can use, like, I don't get fired for taking off work. And again,
Yeah,
like it's just,
the idea of unpaid time off is ridiculous, right?
yeah, exactly. Like to me, that sounds ridiculous. It's like, what? Wait, you're telling me that I can stay home from work if I'm sick and you won't fire me, but you're not going to pay me, but you won't fire me.
It's like the
Like,
opposite of what my frame of reference in terms of a good job would be like, oh, you can get some time off, but it is paid. It's like, no, this is unpaid time off.
yes. And that's what Amazon is offering right now, to most of its workers, or at least all right. So that's what they started with when coronavirus hit. They offered everybody, like in all positions, unlimited UPT, unpaid time off for the month of March. And I think my guess is they extended it through April. But yeah, and I see somebody who's in the chat saying you can use it if you're late. Yeah, like, and if you're 5 minutes late, you use an hour of UPT, and if you are an hour late, it also uses an hour of UPT. I think that's how a lot of people end up losing a lot of their hours of UPT by accidentally being 5 minutes late or something because there's a big traffic jam or whatever. But yeah, I wasn't used to 5 minutes mattering, and 5 minutes mattered a lot in all of the jobs that I did for this book, and I think that's one of the biggest differences. Again, like just my expectations are higher, and that's why I'm like always going to be upper class. I think is because I have an education. I always know that there will be a way out of this for me, even if I don't have any money, which I kind of don't, but whatever. um, I have forgotten the question again. I'm so sorry.
So we've got about 10 more minutes left, and I
That's good because I am like, it is past my bedtime and I am starting to lose track
I was
of
going to
questions.
say thank you so much. I don't know if everybody knows, but Emily is zooming in from Philly, so she's, what is it now? It's almost 10:30.
Yeah, and I'm an old lady.
That's past my bedtime too. So if we started off with a question about sort of how you do labor studies, within the seminar title, this idea of redefining labor, I was curious to know just like how you think a company like Amazon, or how sort of an intervention like your journalistic intervention is working to sort of redefine labor in this present moment. Big question.
Well, well, I mean, I think right now it's a really interesting time. I may or may not be working on a piece about this right now, but it's a really interesting time at Amazon right now. I wouldn't say that I think that there is like overwhelming union support at Amazon now, but I do think there's a lot of discontent. Because yeah, and I think that's true not just across fulfillment centers, but across all the people who are working right now, especially like, frontline people, cashiers, food service, delivery people, nurses. I think everybody is like looking around at the other people who are also working and sort of thinking to them like, we could shut this place down. Like you and me and you and you and garbage collectors, and like we're getting like this essential worker tag really is sort of like, I think telling like people I think are feeling like they have a little more dignity and a little more power than they used to feel. Like, I don't know. This is just a sort of answer blowing in the wind or whatever. But I do feel like there's a creeping sense of solidarity, not just among the fulfillment centers, but with like all workers who are getting paid crap to go risk their lives. And, you know, when I think Capital has not been very smart about being incredibly open about like, oh yeah, we'll just throw you guys, screw you guys, go work. We need to keep the economy moving. Like a few 100,000 lives is nothing compared to, you know, keeping the economy going. Like I think most normal people hear that and are horrified. It's just like returning to the idea that like all of these people are freaks, like, or monsters or whatever. Like, I don't know if being out of touch with what their decisions actually mean and how they actually affect people's lives, whether that just puts them completely out of touch with, because they've never met an Amazon worker or they haven't talked to a McDonald's worker in 20 years or whatever. Like I think we're all struggling right now to understand whether they don't know or whether they know and just don't care. And I think either one, I still haven't made up my mind about that either. I think it's definitely possible that the people who are in charge of this country know how miserable they're making people, and how difficult people's lives have become. And I also think it's totally plausible that they're just so walled off that they have no idea. It's just like the senators with the in the weeds thing. Like everybody I talk to in media, especially the higher up you go, is horrified by the idea of walking 15 miles a day. But until you bring that actual figure out, like they kind of look at you like you're whining, like just saying like, oh, it was really hard. Oh, it was really, you know, they only respect it when you like, they won't take your word for it. You have to show them. Like you have to bring up like 15 miles a day, or my feet were so swollen that my shoelaces were strained, or like I was popping Advil every single day, like candy. Like that's the difference between I hope that they don't know, because then it will be easier.
Well, I think you're right to point out there has been a surge in activism. I heard just recently, I mean, there have been more strikes or more employees on strikes in the past 2 years than there have been in the 40 years leading up to those 2 years. So I think there's reason to be optimistic. They may not know, but they're gonna find out. I feel like.
It'll be. I mean, it's an exciting time to be involved in labor. Exciting is a word for it.